Hi everyone, I think we're on air now, so welcome to Developer Evangelism 101. I'm Richard from Challenge Post and I'm your host for the first in this webinar series. Challenge Post is a platform for developers to showcase the projects that they build and to get inspired to build others. So I'm going to briefly take you through kind of what this webinar is about, and then we'll move over to our speakers and show you everything that's going on in developer evangelism. So developer evangelism really is at its core the practice of reaching and converting developers. I think it's often easier to explain developer evangelism by kind of saying really what it isn't. It contains elements of both sales and marketing, but it is really neither of those disciplines in its whole. It's really about reaching developers, starting conversations with them, and really with the aim of building different relationships. It's also practiced by an increasing number of organizations. People are using it, as some of your presenters will tell you today, for lots of different elements, but really the breadth of organizations doing this is massively increasing. It's also important to point out that developer evangelism is a journey, and your path to developer evangelism as an organization will take many different forms. What we want to do here with Developer Evangelism 101 is present to you some of the different ways that people are reaching developers and some of the different tactics that you should be aware of. So the idea is not to just pick one of these and do all of that, but to really be aware of what's going on in the industry and which are the trends that you should be tracking. So for this first session, we've got two great speakers, and I'll introduce those in a moment. What they're going to do is they're going to take a few minutes to talk, and then we'll take your questions. You can ask questions at any time using the Q&A app, or you can just use the hashtag on Twitter, dev101. We've got Swift with us from MLH. He's the co-founder of MLH, and he's going to talk to us about college hackathons. I've also got my colleague, Brian Coles, and he's going to talk to you about kind of what's happening with longer-term engagements around hackathons. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here now and switch over to Swift, and he'll take you through what's happening in the college world. Swift, you're up.
Awesome. Well, first off, thanks so much, Challenge Post, for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. Really excited to be here. I've got some slides today that I'm going to share with everybody. Try pulling it up now. Cool. So, yeah, as Richard mentioned, I'm Swift. I'm the CEO and co-founder of this little outfit called Major League Hacking, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But generally, I'm here today to talk to you about hackathons. So hackathons are just one specific example of in-person developer marketing. When people think of developer evangelism and some of the probably most well-known examples of companies that do developer evangelism well, they think of those companies at hackathons or other similar in-person developer events. Hackathons are becoming an increasingly larger and larger part of the developer event ecosystem. But the truth is that a lot of companies out there don't really know how to get involved with them. Why they're important and where they fit into their whole developer evangelism or developer marketing strategy. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about hackathons. I'm going to specifically hone in on student hackathons, which is the kind of events that Major League Hacking works with specifically, and then we'll talk at the end about some strategies for how to get involved with them. So here's a quick outline of the talk that I'm going to give. We'll start it off. I want to introduce myself, tell you a little bit about my involvement with hackathons and why you should even care what I have to say. Then we'll transition into talking about hackathons in general and specifically why student hackathons matter and why they're something that all developer evangelism focused companies should be thinking about. And then finally we'll talk about getting involved as a sponsor, some meaningful strategies to help you actually get the most out of getting involved with these events and to help you figure out the best way for you to think about hackathons in your organization going forward. So let's dive right in. As I mentioned, I'm Swift. I'm the CEO of Major League Hacking. I've actually been involved in hackathons, specifically student hackathons, since the second ever student hackathon that took place back in 2010. Before I went to my first hackathon, though, I wanted to be a lawyer, believe it or not. But I went to my first hackathon, and I was so inspired by what I saw that I decided to switch into CS and get a job at a startup, which you can see in the bottom corner down there. It's CrowdTap. So I worked for a year or so as an engineer at CrowdTap, going to as many hackathons as I get my hands on. From there, I went on to be the first New York City-based developer evangelist for SendGrid. SendGrid is one of those organizations that people think about when they think about developer evangelism. So I spent a number of years for SendGrid traveling around, working with different developer communities, spending a lot of time at hackathons and different developer events, and thinking really hard about how to engage developers and the whole developer evangelism industry and problem as a whole. Sometime during all that, I also started my first startup, Hacker League, which is a hackathon-focused company. That one got acquired by Intel back in 2013. Through that, I went to literally hundreds of hackathons. So at this point, definitely lots of developer evangelism and hackathon stuff going on in my life. These days, as I mentioned, I run Major League Hacking. For those of you who don't know Major League Hacking, we run the world's official student hackathon league. So we're a sanctioning and support organization that works with student hackers and student-focused developer events all over the world. We run the official leagues in the US, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. And we're this year, I think we're on track to, well, actually I won't spoil the surprise. I'll get there in a few minutes, but suffice it to say that Major League Hacking started a couple years ago and has been experiencing some pretty incredible growth in the student hackathon sector. So before I move on to talking about student hackathons in particular, let's take a step back and talk about what a hackathon is in general. Not everybody may have attended a hackathon, although I imagine if you're interested in developer evangelism, you probably have a vague idea of what they are. The kinds of hackathons that I'm going to be talking about follow the traditional 24 to 48 hour model. Typically, they're overnight, over a weekend, and the ones that I'm talking about are in person. All the code or hardware or whatever the attendees build at these events is done over the course of that weekend. Typically, the events that Major League Hacking tends to work with are between 100 and 1,500 attendees. The way I like to describe hackathons is you can think of it as a real-time science fair or an invention competition. This isn't hacking in the sense of the word with people breaking into things. It's hacking in the sense of building and creating things for art and fun. So, definitely something to keep in mind. And hackathons literally take place all over the world. Hundreds and hundreds of them take place, every month. One of the best places to find about hackathons that are going on near you is obviously Challenge Post, so definitely check them out for that. There's also a number of different kinds of hackathons that go on. There's professional competitive hackathons, there's professional focused relaxed hackathons, there's internal hackathons that companies have, there's startup focused hackathons, there's vertical focused hackathons, and then there's student hackathons, and that's where I spend my days thinking about. So I want to talk to you a little bit about student hackathons and why they're so important. So out of all the different kinds of hackathons out there, at Major League Hacking we decided to focus on student events, and the question is why? And it's because there's something really special about student events that doesn't necessarily hold true to all other kinds of hackathons. The story that I love to tell that really frames this thing up really well is a story about this really famous student hackathon called PennApps. So back in the winter of 2014, PennApps was scheduled to take place on Valentine's Day weekend. So PennApps is a student hackathon that takes place at the University of Pennsylvania. It attracts somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 student hackers from literally all over the world. So picture this. It's Valentine's Day weekend. You're a student. House of Cards has just come out on Netflix, and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground between you and Philadelphia. Now, any normal college student would just be like, forget it. I'm just going to stay in my bed and watch Netflix all day. But instead, 1,000 students decide to give up their weekends of partying and college activities to get on a bus, trek hours to Pennsylvania to Philadelphia, and trek through the snow to this hackathon where they spend literally Friday, Saturday, and Sunday building whatever their imagination could come up with and then demoing it to all of their peers. It's pretty incredible that a huge group of students like that would be willing to give up their weekend for something that sounds a lot like work. So the real question is, why are they doing that? And to even further categorize how important this is, I want to show you this graph. This is a graph of the number of student hackathons that have existed in the areas that Major League Hacking sanctions events. So it looked all the way back in 2010 when the first student hackathons started happening, up to where we are now in 2015. So you can see we're in the middle of this huge growth in student hackathons. And so the question is, like, why is this a big deal? And it's because the students are getting something at these hackathons that they're not getting at their educational institutions that they're attending. The skills that they are expected to know once they graduate and the skills that they are learning in school are not the same. And so these students are actually attending hackathons to acquire these skills. And you know, one of the first rules of developer marketing in general is that you should go to where the developers are. And the developers are going to be going to places where they can learn, where they can network, where they can, you know, work on self-improvement. And hackathons are filling in that gap for students right now in a huge way. So you can see in the graph in 2013, Major League Hacking, that's when Major League Hacking launched in 2013. We had about 8 events. Last semester, we worked with something like 64 of them. And then we're on track for 2015 to work with over 150 events in the US or North America and Europe. We're estimating that about 50,000 students are going to attend these events. So needless to say, we're in the middle of an explosive growth of student hackathons. And I think that, you know, it's really important to keep in mind that you know, this isn't something that students are just doing alone. It's even becoming a sort of a team sport of such, right? About 10% of the higher education institutions in North America participated in the Major League Hacking events that took place this past semester. That's insane, right? 10% of all of the higher ed institutions in North America. And this is where the students are going. So if you're going to be a company that's focused on developer evangelism, on developer marketing, then student hackathons are definitely going to be a place that you will spend your time. So let's move on to talking about, like, how to get involved as a sponsor. So obviously this is an important movement. Obviously this is something that's growing pretty rapidly. What is the best way for you to get involved? Oftentimes I see that, you know, I'll go to events and there will be, of course, a first-time sponsoring or a first-time partnering company at one of these hackathons, and they'll have literally no idea what they're doing, which is totally fine. And, you know, it definitely speaks to the quality of a company to be able to analyze the marketplace, to see these college hackathons and to get involved in such an amazing way at the ground level. So I want to talk about some strategies for, like, being effective when you actually decide to go to these events. Typically speaking, I think that there's generally 3 categories of sponsors that get involved in hackathons. Now, you can definitely have overlap between these categories. Of course, you can be doing multiple, but generally speaking, I think most companies fit into one of these 3 categories. So the first one is product, or product feedback, as I actually like to call it. Basically, these are the companies that are going to hackathons because they can watch in real time developers, their customers, use their products and figure out where the pain points are. That's companies like Twilio, companies like SendGrid, companies like Mashery, who have APIs or technical products where they can watch developers integrate them into their programs in real time and figure out the best things to do to improve the experience. Another kind of company is a marketing company. Now, really, this actually takes two different angles. So one is large companies like maybe Microsoft or Dell, who are looking to engage with this audience in a new way to, you know, market what they do to these developers. But there's also companies who have products that may not necessarily be the most well-known or the ones that everybody uses, and they want to get the word out about their products. So, you know, whether it be changing perception or getting the word out, marketing is certainly another kind of company. And the final one is recruiting. This is a pretty obvious one. Obviously, you know, hackathons are a really important part of the developer ecosystem these days, and especially in universities, pretty much everyone who attends one of these hackathons will eventually be looking for a job. So, of course, you know, if you're a company that wants to find the best technical talent, you go to hackathons. So, generally speaking, there's these 3 different kinds of companies, and I think that there are good strategies and bad strategies for each of these to figure out how to engage in hackathons. So, the thing to think about is what your key metrics are. A lot of people go into hackathons and they will pick out, you know, some arbitrary metric that they think is success, whether that be number of API integrations, number of resumes they collect, number of eyeballs who see their logo, who knows, right? But the truth is they come up with metrics, and a lot of companies don't really think through how that would fit into one of these 3 strategies. And I think that if you pick the correct metric for the strategy you're approaching, that you can find a great deal of success by doing that. So a good example, would be, let's start with the product feedback category. So say that your goal is to improve the developer experience around your product. Well, a really good way to do that would be to get and spend a lot of time with them, writing down everything you can about that experience and analyzing pain points. So maybe your actual success metric at the end of the hackathon is the number of bugs that you identified in your client libraries, or time to hello world for their integrations for those teams, something like that. For marketing, one of the things to think about is experiences, right? Like maybe you want to get developers to use whatever your new API or service you're offering is. Well, just handing out cards and just saying, hey, you should use this is not necessarily going to be a great way to encourage people to do it. Walking around and talking to developers and finding out what they're building and then thinking of a clever way to integrate what you're offering into their hack or their project is a much better strategy. So generally speaking, thinking about the experience that you have during your first touches with these attendees is a good way to think about marketing. And finally, for recruiting, as part of hackathon sponsorships, a lot of companies collect resumes. Collecting resumes is great. You can definitely do a ton of outbound outreach to these really talented developers. But the truth is that the best talent you're going to have to build relationships with. So again, this might be another one of those sponsorships where you want to think through really good experiences that you're having with these developers. So maybe you have some kind of workshop where you're helping them solve their problems, or you're showing off really great engineers in your company, something like that. So then I want to leave you with one bit of feedback, or one pro tip for developer evangelism. This is something that I learned through my years of doing it. The truth is, developer evangelism is the business of making friends, not customers. The real value of developer evangelism is having this long tail relationship with people, especially developers who will go on to work at multiple startups. The relationship you're building with those people is the relationship that makes developer evangelism work, right? The idea of meeting somebody at a hackathon, helping them with their project, they learn about your API, they go back to work, maybe months down the road, they run into a problem that your API solves, and they say, hey, I know this great product, it definitely will solve our problem, and in fact, I know the person who evangelizes it, we can bring them in, they can talk to us and help us. So it's that relationship that's really the key part here. And there's a couple of things you can think about when you're making friends at events. Number one, surprise and delight. Do things that encourage people to think about your brand and what you're offering in a different way. Create really engaging experiences where people can associate your brand with something positive, whether that be some kind of mini event at a different conference or hackathon, maybe having really good mentorship, maybe sponsoring things that actually matter, that people care about. And of course, the last thing, don't waste people's time. If you're wasting people you want to be friends with time, they're not going to think of you as a friend. They're going to think of you as a burden, so make sure you're doing that. And I think that's everything I've got. So thanks, guys. I'm going to pass it back to Richard.
Hey, Swift, that's great. Thanks for that. And what an incredible graph that's showing the growth of college hackathons. It's pretty amazing stuff. So we're going to go now to Brian, and Brian's going to share with us some tactics about kind of lengthening this engagement. So we've just learned a lot about college hackathons. So Brian, will you share with us some of the thoughts that you have around kind of the different types of engagement and perhaps kind of how to make this engagement a little longer?
Sure. So thanks, Richard, and thanks, Swift. As it says on the nifty name tag, my name's Brian. I work with Richard at Challenge Post, and so you guys understand a bit of the sort of division of labor and how we work. Richard helps companies run the hackathons that Swift was just talking about. Works closely with MLH and lots of civic organizers and nonprofits and people all over the world to run traditional in-person, two-day-ish events that we're just talking about. I work with companies to help them run longer-form online challenges or virtual hackathons. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking with you about what makes a good online challenge, as well as dive into some other non-competitive developer outreach events and different types of hackathons, because more than talking to companies about competitions, what I'm really lucky enough to do is talk to lots of developer evangelists and platform marketing professionals about their broad developer outreach goals, the strategies that they're using to accomplish them, and what's working and what's not. So really the goal of this talk is to hopefully share a bit of guidance from what I hear in the industry, and then obviously make you better at running hackathons and online challenges as well. So let me share these slides, or attempt to, and forgive me if I butcher it, as I did. There we go. So hopefully everyone's now seeing my slides. So the title of this talk is Using In-Person Events to Support Online App Challenges, as I just described. So Swift just went through largely college hackathons. This is a graph of sort of beyond college, of broad definitions of the different types of hackathons that we see. The college hackathons, I think, would largely fit into this top one, the Software Maker Festival, where it's not necessarily about one particular theme or one particular platform, but really about getting people together to have an incredible experience amongst peers, do some learning, build some awareness for your brand, and ultimately have a really good time. Less so than sort of being focused on one person. Then there's civic hackathons. So anytime there is a natural disaster, we see lots of hackathons pop up with people wanting to inspire their peers to solve this problems. We also have nonprofits and other kinds of activists and communities saying software is changing every industry. Let's get the best minds in software together to solve the problems that we care about most. And software developers tend to be an altruistic bunch, or they want to build software that makes a difference. So they like attending events where it's not necessarily about creating another time waster, but about something that's really going to improve the lives of others. The next one is industry innovation. So we see companies like McDonald's or Target, who you don't really think of as software companies, running hackathons to say, how can we crowdsource new ideas? How can we get people creating software to approach our business problems in new ways that we never would have thought of from within our own bubble? And for participants, they get insight into problems they wouldn't have known about, and businesses that they can get in that they would never have known about had this not been brought to their attention through hackathons. Swift mentioned recruiting. So recruiting is always a bit of just about all of these hackathons. Some are dedicated specifically to that. Often, so a company like Apple, amongst others, will come to a university or a city and invite people to build the best apps on their platform in 24 or 48 hours. And the underlying goal really is let's meet the top talent locally. Let's get them in touch with our recruiters. But also there's some platform marketing and awareness attached to it. And then there's platform-focused hackathons. Right? One company, Evernote's very good about this amongst others, and saying let's get you together, let's focus on one platform, take a really deep dive on it, and get some feedback on it in the wilds. Sit next to developers saying, what was it like using this tool? Where are the bugs? What would you like to see improved? As well as teach them how to use it. So that's sort of the broad overview. And again, there's lots of overlap between them, but hopefully this helps frame what are the hackathon varieties. And so that's hackathons, but not every developer outreach event needs to be a competition. In fact, many shouldn't be. I talk to people like, we want to engage a lot of developers, so we're going to run a hackathon. And I talk to them, and that may actually not be the right thing for their goals, as much as we encourage hackathons and obviously love them. So sometimes it should be a workshop, right? It should just be, forget competing with each other for prizes and building a product in 2 days. Let's take some time to really get to know each other, dive deep into what this platform is, learn about each other's capabilities and needs, and spend the day really focused on learning and not so much busy doing. Then there's sort of industry conferences. Right, so talking about things like App World or TechCrunch or Developer Week, there's tons of these conferences that it makes sense to get different types of developers attending. Not every developer, especially if they have responsibilities on the weekend, is going to attend a hackathon, but maybe they can get a day off to attend the conference where they can network and learn. So these industry conferences play a big role beyond hackathons, as do meetups. So every major city has a Ruby meetup and an Android meetup and an iOS meetup and every other framework you could think of. And it makes sense to sponsor those. Maybe you can buy dinner or buy drinks, or just attend and maybe speak and let people know about your platform as an attendee. Then there's webinars like this one. Again, events can be hard to attend, and not every incredible software developer is in a major market where these hackathons are. So holding a webinar like this one can be a great way to reach people as can office hours, both in person, saying from 2 to 5, our doors are open to you, or online, saying here's our hangout, come join, like this one. And then increasingly, we're seeing companies do these partner summits, where instead of sort of doing a big release or announcing something big at a major industry conference, they're saying, let's run our own event for 1 or 2 days a year and get all of our partners together in one place and really focus on us. And so we're seeing Samsung and Twilio and lots of other companies doing these sort of developer days and developer conferences. And it can be a great way of rallying your community and not sharing the spotlight, frankly. So now let's transition away from in-person events and get into these online challenges or virtual hackathons. And I set up this graph to sort of contrast the two because I think it can be very helpful. So when I talk about an online challenge, obviously it's on a website and it's a global competition and tends to last more like 2 to 4 months. And we'll get into some best practices. But it's really much more about creating products, full-blown apps that people are planning to commercialize, as opposed to the prototypes or hacks or passion projects that you tend to see at a hackathon. So people come to me like, we're really chasing meaningful implementations. Say hackathons are great as a component, but maybe we want to run an online challenge to engage more people and give them more time to build something really great that you'll be proud to celebrate. And because they're online, obviously they're global. People frequently say, we really want to grow our global community, so we're doing an event in San Francisco. Well, the tech industry can fall into this trap, but San Francisco is not the world of technology, and online app competitions allow you to reach everybody. They're also much more about implementations, right? So hackathons at SwiftSet can be about marketing and long-tail awareness. Online challenges, because of the time frame and frankly a lot of the prize money involved and the scale of work that's developed, can be much more about meaningful implementations and partnerships. So frequently, people that win or enter online challenges go on to become strategic partners or get acquired or get integrated into the core product in some way. There's often sort of a strategic acquisitions element to it. They're frankly work. This is for people who are not necessarily hobbyists, but people that make a living building software and plan to make a living building the software that they submit into your challenge. And pros, so we love hackathons. They do tend to attract a younger audience, again, because that's who's willing to give up their weekend for some free pizza, as opposed to people who need to mow the lawn and take the kids to soccer practice and do everything else, who might be more senior developers, and they can work on nights and weekends on their own schedule, but giving up the whole weekend might be too big of an ask. And the online challenges tend to be more for existing teams, people that already know each other and have done stuff before and are really ready to show off what they can do. They lack the fidelity of a lot of the networking that can take place at a hackathon, although we do provide tools to help people meet each other, and there is certainly sort of a team matchmaking function to these online challenges. So hopefully that's a good overview of how, the difference between the two. And here's an example of how they can play into each other. So we're very proud to have both Evernote and Samsung as two of our clients. And these maps show how during the course of their 4-month-long online developer competitions, they ran a series of meetups and hackathons and workshops all over the world to really boost local engagement for these online challenges. And it is resource intensive, but hopefully you have partners or people in different cities that you can accomplish something like this. And that way, when you meet a developer at an event, you can say, this is a really great start on using our platform and what could be a viable application. Now, keep polishing this over the next month or two and enter our online challenge to win a bigger prize and more recognition when you have this launched in an app store, and we're both going to be really proud to show it off. So what makes an online app challenge great? Here is 6 points I'll review pretty briefly to get us started on the right foot. So the first one is the developer program being ready for prime time. The developer experience, so being able to onboard yourself and have thorough documentation and the performance of the API or SDK, whatever tool we're talking about, if it does feature a tool, needs to really be ready for developers to run with it. We've unfortunately had some situations where an API wasn't quite ready, and then the competition doesn't go as well as everyone would like because the developer program isn't there. So we love kicking off new APIs with online app challenges under the presumption that it's been battle tested. You've had maybe an internal hackathon to test it. You've had some beta users with early partners to really make sure that it's ready to go. Then once we're up, an inspirational theme. So we generally don't want to run just the cloud app challenge, right? We want to present a problem that developers can solve, or business opportunities that you see as being really ripe for this tool. So provide data, provide problem statements, provide lots of resources for people to learn about the issues in the tool, but don't be overly prescriptive, right? This isn't an RFP. We get approached by someone, I want someone to build an app that does X, Y, Z. That's generally not a good fit for an online challenge. They're not about procurement, which is often what people are talking about when they describe things in detail like that. And they are more about open innovation, seeing what people do, and you don't want to restrict that by being overly prescriptive. In terms of timing, through running hundreds of online challenges with many of the best government agencies and companies in the world, have really found the sweet spot for the submission period to be about 2 to 4 months. Less than that, it can be a bit too quick to really get the word out and for people to set aside time to build things that are really great. Longer, it tends to drag. The announcement's not super exciting because it's so long, and by the end, everyone's sort of over it. There is plenty of room for it to be shorter or longer. So tools that are very simple to implement, it makes total sense to do a 1 month or maybe even shorter competition. Tools that are really difficult to use and require big builds, maybe it's a big game development platform, that may make sense to go longer, but generally we find that this is the sweet spot for the submission period, followed by public voting. So the apps come in, there's usually a celebrity judge panel of some sort that I'll talk about in a moment, and then a popular choice or fans choice prize that's determined by public voting. And we suggest you do that because when you offer a popular choice prize, everyone starts sharing their work to their friends and family and on Twitter and Facebook and really getting the word out to solicit votes, and it's huge for engagement. And then having compelling prizes. So what makes prizes compelling? Cash is always appreciated. It's a sign of respect. Everyone needs it at one time or another. So we do like to see usually a cash component to the prizes. Doesn't need to be millions of dollars, but enough to show that it's being respectful. And then beyond cash prizes, we love to see how else can you make developers look great in front of their peers and really recognize them as being great at their craft. Can you put them on stage at a conference? Can you put out a press release? Developers take a lot of pride in being recognized in front of their peers. And how else can you help them drive users for their apps? More than money, more than recognition, developers and entrepreneurs want people using their products. So can you offer marketing support that's going to get them noticed and get them users? That makes a great prize as well. And then having prestigious judges involved. So VCs, executives from your companies, journalists, anyone who's a celebrity in your space. It can be a prize in itself just submitting your app and getting it in front of these people. So it can help with engagement that way, and it can also help in that if you get celebrity judges for whatever that means in your industry, they're likely to have a relevant following on their social media, and so they will share their work and engage their audience with your challenge. So having those judges can be big for getting the word out. And then on the theme of getting the word out, there is no such thing as too much promotion, and you cannot underestimate the effort it takes to engage developers and keep them engaged over the course of several months. So starting with a community like Challenge Post is obviously a great start, and alerting your own network, but also staying active on message boards and meetups and reaching out to hackathon organizers and computer science departments. And anyone else who may be interested in this, you should be screaming from the literal and figurative mountaintops, getting the word out about this, and looping in partners as well. Anyone whose success is hinged on yours, get them involved as a promotional partner. And then once all the apps come in, you obviously want to celebrate the winners, but you really want to make sure that everyone has a good experience and feels like them using your platform or entering your competition is really appreciated. because you don't want the experience to be, okay, here's the winners, and oh, I didn't win, I get nothing, and it ends there. Right? So offering things like access to mentors or accelerators or office hours or running another hackathon or challenge, anything you can do to continue that conversation is really going to be beneficial to making this challenge a long-term success over the course of your whole developer outreach program. And that is really everything that I had planned to share today. I'd encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to please submit your questions using that Q&A function that should be up on your screen. Richard and Swift and I would love to answer any questions you have over however much time we have left.
Thanks, Brian. That was really awesome. I'm going to just stop you presenting here 2 seconds. We've already had some great questions come in, actually. So I've got some questions of my own that have been emailed us for you both before the event. But let's start off, actually, with a question that I think this is a great question for you, Swift. This came in from Adam. And he's saying, what do you think about using college students as ambassadors at college events? And what's the best way to think about compensating them?
Yeah, so I think that the trick with ambassador programs, and I've seen this a couple of times, is that having an ambassador can be a huge make or break difference when you have an employee there working with the ambassador. Like the ambassador definitely, especially like at some of these larger events, like it can be really overwhelming to like, be at a 1,000-person event by yourself, right? And at those times, having an ambassador with you can be great to help, pick up the slack, to help, really further engage with participants. I don't think that I have seen a successful implementation of an ambassador program at events where it actively replaces having a company representative on the ground. But that could be an issue of like trading, or like, developer evangelism is still a relatively new field, so maybe we just don't know how to trade people to be developer evangelism ambassadors. I'm not quite sure, but generally speaking, I think when you think about it, thinking about college ambassadors as a supplement to what you're already doing is a much better strategy than thinking about them as a replacement. In terms of compensation, I mean, you should think about it like a job, right? I mean, truth be told, at bare minimum, you should be covering their flight. You should be thinking about covering their a hotel if they want to go home and sleep, which is totally an option. There's no need, if you're paying somebody to be there, there's no reason to like make them stay the whole time. You treat them the same way you would treat an employee who is going to one of these events. Honestly, you should think about compensating them for their time too. Like I could definitely see instances where you're covering travel and expenses and lodging, and then you're maybe you're not compensating them, but you should have different expectations for whether you're paying for their time or just covering their travel and costs to be there for sure. So and in terms of rate, I mean, like most of the people who you're going to want to send there are going to be developers, right? So keep in mind that they could get a job programming for a different company that pays pretty well. So it's going to have to be a pretty enticing offer to get them to do it. But it's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, I definitely think college ambassadors can be a really successful supplement for a developer evangelism program. Is it a replacement for a developer evangelist or some kind of on-site representative? No, but there are companies out there that are successful at it.
Awesome, sir. That's a great answer. I'm going to take another question that is actually about the college scene from Laurel, and then we'll move on to a question about online challenges from Sam. So Laurel asks us, would you top-tier colleges like Stanford are saturated with hackathons, and should we start to kind of look outside of that top tier? This is related to my favorite hackathon question of all time, Swift, which is, have we reached peak hackathon?
Yeah, that's I hear that one all the time too. Okay, so I'm going to address this in two parts. The first part is like, where should you be looking for like really talented developers? So I went to Rutgers, and my co-founder of Major League Hockey went to Stony Brook. Both of us are developers by background. But Stony Brook and Rutgers are not exactly top-tier CS schools by any stretch of the imagination. And having been to literally hundreds of these events, the truth is that yes, there is some proportionally large number of really talented developers who go to top-tier CS institutions. but there's also like a large number of really talented developers who go to schools that you may not have ever heard of before, or who you may not even think of recruiting at. But just the same, there are a ton of really talented people there. I think one of the things that I'm really interested in the future for Major League Hacking, and I don't know how we get there, but I would love to find a way to help students who are at these institutions who don't have the same, okay, if you're a student at, I don't know, some random school in Kansas, which is where I was born, and I very well could have ended up going to school there, Google might not be coming there to recruit, right? But if you, as a student, it's kind of a disservice to you, because you might be a really talented developer who goes to tons of hackathons and is clearly very skilled, but maybe no companies know about you there. And so I would love to figure out a way to help those students, because I think there's a ton of them out there, and I think that all it would take is just somebody offering them a helping hand to get them in front of some really amazing companies and help to make that connection. And there's a lot of people working on that problem out there, and if anybody is working on it in particular and wants to talk to me about ways we could work together to do that, I'd be very open to it. And then in terms of the peak hackathon question, people ask me that all the time, like, oh, hackathons are clearly going to die tomorrow. Every day somebody says that to me. The truth is, they're not going anywhere. This is how developers are going to spend their time, in the future. This is what they're doing now. It's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. There's going to be more hackathons. Maybe the competition element or the structure of the events will change. Certainly, that's quite a possibility. But developers will always get together. They're always going to want to code. And hackathons are just the current manifestation of that, and they're not going anywhere. And in fact, we're probably just going to see more and more events like them in the future.
Awesome, Swift. Thanks for that. So, Brian, I've got a question for you, which I know is always one of your most popular questions. So, Sam is asking, for an online hackathon, a mobile API, iOS, Android, it's kind of running 1 or 2 months. So, how many developers are going to take part in this? What does that look like?
So, question I'll answer with a lot of caveats. So the short answer, there's 2 parts. So there's how many apps are going to be entered into your competition, and then how many developers are going to participate. So to address the first part, we see anywhere from 20 to 200 plus apps submitted to a typical online challenge. We've had cases where it's several thousand, but generally it's in that sort of 20 to 200 range, which is a big range. And about 3 to 5 times more developers than that will enter the competition. So that's the short answer. Now, what impacts that range is a bunch of things. So how interesting and easy to use is your tool, and how compelling is the problem you're putting out there? What is the prize packages, and how are the prize packages split up? If you do winner takes all, you might optimize for quality, but you're not going to optimize for volume. Whereas you may do a strategy where you do lots of small prizes, almost like a participation prize, where the top, say, 100 get a small prize, and then you're optimized for volume, and you're likely to see much bigger participation. Other things that factor in, what kind of recognition are you offering, who else is involved in the competition, how long is it going to run, so all those factors go into that range. Hopefully there's a satisfactory answer for you in there.
Yeah, definitely. It's a difficult question. I totally understand that. So we also had a question that I think is really applicable to both of you. So Jamie asked, when marketing a hack, and I'm going to presume, Jamie, you mean a hackathon, what are the most effective tactics that organizers can employ? So how do you reach out beyond the community you already have access to? And I think this also applies to your work, Brian. So kind of getting beyond just your kind of normal list, your normal community, how do you kind of push that online challenge beyond those? So Swift, do you want to take a swing at this one first?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, there's a couple of strategies that I've seen that I find to be really effective. Honestly, the most effective strategy you can possibly get is in-person, viral marketing, quote unquote. But basically that means you encourage people who are coming to the event to bring their friends. That's the single most successful way. Honestly, if you talk to people who have had really compelling, amazing experiences around hackathons, a lot of them are introduced to them by their peers or friends. Other than that, there's certainly different tools you can use to increase awareness. Facebook is a great one. I know a ton of events use that. Twitter is obviously a great one. There's platforms. I mean, Challenge Post, putting the event on there, and is a great way to get the word out. If you think about the people who go to like the events pages, either on Major League Hacking or Challenge Post website, like they're probably looking for hackathons. It's a good place to put it. Advertising it at different developer communities. So like maybe going to local meetups and making a community announcement at the end. You could also advertise on different like event listing services, whether that be like Gary's Guide in New York, or like every major city has a startup digest that I use a lot. I remember I organized a hackathon in Brazil when I was working at SendGrid. I don't speak any Portuguese and I know nothing about Brazil at all, but the way that I went about like filling up the event with a couple hundred developers was, I reached out to local community leaders and I enlisted their help in marketing the event, right? And I found somebody to translate the ad into Portuguese for me. I, sent it off to different newsletters that were about the Brazilian startup scene. Like, you have to find people who have an audience and a voice and enlist their help to market the event, right? So, I mean, that would be my answer there.
Well, two things I would add. So one thing is not announcing your hackathon or on the first day that you reach out to an audience, right? You should already be a trusted voice in that community. It always comes off as spammy when your first thing you do is say, do something for me, right? So being a presence and authority who's contributing to the space in a non-greedy way, for lack of a better word, is huge, that when you do come to your hackathon, you've earned that trust already. And then the second thing is attaching it to a cause or a problem that people outside of traditional developer communities care about. Right? So we've done things for hospitals about how do we improve the patient experience. So now we have all these healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses and administrators spreading the word about this competition because it addresses a problem that they care about, and they have networks that you weren't tapped into already, of people who are already passionate about the space. So aligning it with a cause and partners who care about that cause is really key to reaching new audiences.
That's great. Thanks for that, Brian. So last question, and if anyone has any more questions, let's get them posted now. We've got just over 10 minutes left in this webinar. Of course, this is going to be posted up on our YouTube channel, and we'll get the word out. We'll be everywhere. So I know if you tag either Swift or tag Brian, I'm sure online they'll follow up with any questions we can't answer today. So the one question that we had here now was from Chris. So Chris is saying, like, what prizes or incentives could he offer to get students to at least consider using his API? So kind of what prizes have you seen that are effective?
Yeah, so my co-founder John wrote this really fantastic article that's on the Major League Hacking blog that I definitely recommend checking out. It's called Prizes Are the Worst Thing Since Moldy Sliced Bread or something like that. But basically the gist of it is he looked at all the different kinds of prizes that people offer at hackathons and broke them down into different categories and picked out the ones that he thought were the best incentives for developers. The conclusion of it is that there's generally two kinds of prizes that are really, really good. There's prizes that encourage people to continue hacking. So like hardware, like maybe you give them an Arduino or a drone or like some kind of nifty gadget that they can bring to their next hackathon and continue to use. So it encourages the cycle of like every time they use that piece of hardware or software or whatever you're giving them, they think of your company. It also gets them going to more events and engaging more. So like that's a really positive one. I forget what the term he used to describe those, but I'm just going to call it like things to continue going to hackathons with. And then the other one was experiences that people wouldn't normally have. So I remember Twilio used to do this thing where they would buy like 20 tickets to go see a movie for you and 19 of your friends, and like no one would ever do that. I don't know anybody. I've never met anybody who like buys 20 movie tickets and just gives them out to their friends to go. But like it's just a weird experience that people would never do for themselves. Or another one is I remember at the Foursquare Hackathon when they used to do that. I remember Twilio gave out action figures of you. So they would like take a picture of you and then turn it into an action figure and give it to you. You have an action figure yourself. So like things like that are really clever, and it's like you'd never buy that for yourself, and it probably doesn't cost that much money, but it's really engaging and something that like every time somebody sees that action figure, they're like, where did you get this? Like, why do you have it? And you'll be able to tell a great story about how you use the Twilio API and you won it at a hackathon, right? So definitely check out that article. It's on the Major League Hacking blog along with a bunch of other stuff. Actually, we just released this guide that talks about how to organize a hackathon. It's really excellent. If you go to guide.mlh.io, it's got all the things I've referenced so far. They're all linked in there. There's tons of videos and stuff about like everything from how to raise sponsorship to what kind of prizes to have to how to market your event. So it's certainly, and it's open source. So if you have ideas and things that aren't in there, we'd highly encourage you to contribute as well. And a lot of the stuff that we've put in there is like based off of great knowledge that we learn from people who think about hackathons every day, like the folks over at Challenge Post. So definitely, it's something to check out as well.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I would double down on that guide. It's a really fantastic resource. Brian, I know you mentioned prizes in your slides. Do you have anything to add there on kind of what might be particularly effective prizes used online to engage students?
It's all recognition, right? So obviously Cast is nice, but anything that they can post on Facebook or forward to their parents and say, look, someone who matters thinks I'm really great, is huge. So offering to feature them on your blog or showcase them on your developer portal, or bring them into the office to meet your executives, give them something to brag about beyond a physical good. Although I can't compete with movie tickets and a bobblehead doll.
No, I think that's a really great point. There's this story that my co-founder John tells all the time where he's saying, I think it was his first ever hackathon, was like an online hackathon that Twilio ran, and it was like build a Twilio app, and it was like the Twilio app of the month or whatever, and he won it, and they wrote about it on the blog, and he called his mom and told his mom about it, and like all kinds of stuff like that. But everyone, that story I've heard 100 times. So you're absolutely right. Like recognition is like a huge component of this.
Okay, guys, we're running out of time, so we're going to do one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So, multi-company engagement. So this is lots of companies working together, either online or on an in-person hackathon. Are these a good idea? Has anyone really done this well, or should it just be avoided? Brian,
I'll answer for online challenges. We love multi-company engagements or multi-organization engagements, in that it's great to offer people who are in line with your interests a prize track for the best app or hack that is in line with the cause they care about, and some exposure on the site, and maybe a judge seat. That's all really great. Where it becomes really difficult is making developers choose which tool am I going to use for the online challenges, right? Because if 4 different companies with open APIs co-sponsor a challenge, and one company who has an easier, more appealing tool gets all the attention, it can be a really tough experience for the other ones. So getting other sponsors in line who aren't necessarily competing for that developer attention makes a lot of sense. For the online ones, it can be really tough to have, even though you're not necessarily doing the same thing, somewhat competitive platforms featured equally in an online challenge.
Swift, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's tons of examples of companies that have done a great job with this, right? Like, if you think back on like API Hack Day, which is, I don't even know if they do that anymore, but like, it used to be this initiative where SendGrid, Twilio, Mastery, Spotify, and somebody else like teamed up to organize like hack days all over the world. And then, I mean, Music Hack Day is another great example. Like, that's like basically put on by a bunch of like really large music startups. I mean, like, even outside of hackathons, there's certainly multi-company developer engagements. I remember there's this thing called the Doer Bus that SendGrid, Twilio, and Microsoft did, where basically they like rented a bus and drove a ton of developers from New York to Montreal for like a developer conference. So it's certainly like multi-company engagements are like definitely possible and can be really successful. The thing to know is that like usually the way that those things are structured is there's one company that's really doing all the work, and then there's like a bunch of other companies that are like helping out, right, and just using their brand to like leverage that into more people or more awareness or whatever. So like, and I mean, even in a lot of ways, like if you think about like BattleHack, right, like PayPal's initiative hackathon series, right, like really, like PayPal is the one behind that, right? Like obviously everybody thinks of BattleHack, they think of PayPal. There's tons of other companies that are involved in BattleHack, right? And like it's certainly a multi-company initiative on that front, but really like there is one company that takes the majority of the load. And I think that's true of like most successful things. Even if you think about examples outside of the developer ecosystem, like companies that raise rounds, right? There's always a lead investor, right, or whatever. So like that's a paradigm that's like it exists outside of this, but yeah, I definitely think it could be successful. I certainly think that Brian is right that you want to be careful about not having competing companies in there, and like you want to be careful about the composition of your group, but like it's certainly something that can be successful.
Okay, cool. We've got time for one last question, but I need you guys, you got like a minute each on this one, okay? So this is from Julie, who says, what kind of tools and documentation should sponsors come to hackathons with? So what's the tools, what's the documentation, best practices, 1 minute, go.
Okay, so what tools and documentation stuff? Okay, so I mean, like you should definitely have sample apps, like literally just example fun, like small projects that somebody could like browse through and understand in less than 30 minutes. Any documentation is better than no documentation whatsoever. Then we see a fair share of that. Client libraries are always great for like really popular languages, and like just having a mentor on site who can like actually help people with integrations is going to be key too.
Brian, anything to add?
Nothing that's going to really add value, so I'll just thank everyone for their time. Obviously, if there's any more questions on Brian, Brian at challengepost.com. Love to talk about it further.
Awesome, and I'd just like to say thanks for everyone to tune in to watch this. We actually had a lot of people watching this live. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of people watching it on YouTube as well. Swift, thank you so much, for everything you do for these college hackathons. It's an amazing scene, and like we're proud to be part of it. It's awesome, and thanks for joining us today to share all this stuff. I think like there's some amazing stuff going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm really glad to be a part of it, and it's awesome that you guys do all the things you do to support the developer ecosystem. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome, and thanks to you as well, Brian. So everyone, this was like the first in the series. So we're going to be preparing some new options. If there's a topic that you'd particularly like us to cover, just hit us up at ChallengePost or hit me up. I'm at Forward Media, or I'm also Richard at challengepost.com. Let us know if this was useful. Whatever topics would you like us to cover in the future? We'll get the best people in the world to tell you what they're doing, and hopefully it'll make you all better developer evangelists. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye from New York.